Welcome to our special here on the First TV. Do politics belong in the church? I don't mean internal church workings. It's not our special here. The question is, should the church talk about politics and political things in our country? Do you remember that female pastor lecturing Trump about illegal immigration after his inauguration? And there was that guy from Chattanooga, pastor from Chattanooga, saying that the Bible, it calls for violence. In the case, he was specifically talking about violence against Elon Musk. We rebuked that in a previous episode of Politics by Faith, which is my podcast. We called it Pastor Calls for Violence Against Elon, if you want to go back and hear our proper analysis of the scripture that he obviously took wildly out of context. So should politics be in the church? Let's flip it around, actually. Maybe a better question is, does the church belong in politics? Some people are very wary to mix the two. Right? We got to keep them separate. Right? That's Thomas Jefferson's separation of church and state that we hear so much about. That, of course, is backwards, and we have rebuked that so many times. Thomas Jefferson meant that the government should not interfere in the inner workings of the church. Thomas Jefferson did not mean that the church should have no role in government. But people are still, even though that's so obvious, people are very wary, right? Politics and religion. Never the twain shall meet. Now, one of my mottos is perhaps the opposite is true. And in this case, I believe it is. Where we're told that these two things should never have anything to do with each other. I believe, well, what's the opposite of that? What is these twain never shall meet? The opposite is they never shall touch is always touch. I think the church should be in everything. Oh, but not politics. No. Everything. The church should be in everything. All things. But not politics? Why? Politics it's a part of our society. It's a part of our lives. And of course, we're called to function in society in certain ways. We're called to be a light. Matthew 5:14 says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." This is where John Winthrop from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that's where he came up with his line from his sermon, "A Model of Christian Charity," which you should read, by the way. You should look that up. A Model of Christian Charity. That's the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's our founding. Dude, that guy. And Matthew goes on and says, "Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven." That's the ultimate motive of everything. So honestly, why should we not get involved in politics? If you're advancing God's will to people in our communities and people who live in our earthly homes while we live here, of course you should. We're called to do that. And yes, we're called to have a heavenly perspective. We're called to seek treasures in heaven. We're called to rely on spiritual weapons, not rely on what we think is our worldly strength. Yes, we reject the values of popular culture, but that doesn't mean a complete withdrawal from everything in our lives. Of course not. As G.K. Chesterton said, we do not want a church that will move with the world. We want a church that will move the world. Charles Spurgeon, if you listen to my podcast, Politics by Faith, I quote Charles Spurgeon a lot. I read a lot of Spurgeon. He was a preacher in England, London, for 40 years in this one church. It's mid-late 1800s. And Spurgeon said, "Do not give yourselves up to party spirit. To live for a political party is unworthy of a man who professes to be a Christian." That's true. I'm not living to be a Republican. I'm not going to bow down to at the altar of the Republican. I'm not going to, you see it on the logo there, the elephant idol. I'm not that. That's not how I'm going to bow down at the golden elephant. Being a Republican won't save your soul. But if you're a Christian, then you know that certain things are true. And you're called to engage. Let me speak for me. I'm called to engage my culture with these truths. And one way to do it, there's many, but one way to do that is through the political systems that God created. It's good to want a government that, as Peter said in 1 Peter 2:14, punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. Politics is one way to do that. So, does the church belong in politics? Yeah, politics, the government, I believe is a reflection of culture. So, does the church belong in our culture? Like, of course, you see how I'm asking these obvious questions to show how ridiculous even the question is, but we're all so hesitant. Oh, I don't know. Separation. No. Does the church belong in culture? Of course. Okay, well, politics is a part of our culture. That's it. So, therefore, church involved in politics. And again, I think the church belongs in everything. Spurgeon believed that voting was a God-given privilege and duty. He said before one election, we are now called upon to exercise one of the privileges and duties which go with liberty. Let no man be neglectful in it. Every God-fearing man should give his vote with as much devotion as he prays. Now, Charles was criticized once for being too political, for descending from his high and lofty position as a servant of God and preacher of the everlasting gospel and entering into the defiled arena of party politics. Okay. So he gave a sermon. He gave a sermon on this point. And he admitted that for a Christian minister to be engaged in a partisan work of politics would be of ill repute. Like if he was engaged in just like straight politicking from the pulpit, that's a line that can be crossed. For a Christian man to forget his heavenly citizenship and to only focus on political matters would be a degrading of his calling. But, Charles Spurgeon said, there are points of inevitable contact between the higher and lower spheres. Points where politics persist in coming into collision with our faith. And there we shall be traitors, both to heaven and earth, if we consult our comfort by slinking into the rear. He later said, if we skirted the work which makes us political, like us Christians, we should prove ourselves traitors to the Lord our God. The curse of Maraz would fall upon us if we came not up to the help of the Lord in the day of battle. The curse of Maraz, M-E-R-O-Z. What is that? What was Charles Spurgeon talking? The curse of what? Maraz? Have you ever heard of that? That's from Judges 5:23. Judges 5:23 in the Old Testament says, curse Maraz, says the angel of the Lord. Curse its inhabitants thoroughly. Why? Because they did not come to the help of the Lord, against the mighty. The sin of apathy. So the backstory here is you had the Israelites versus the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the bad guys. And the Israelites won this battle actually because of God, right? God caused this massive rainstorm, and the Canaanites were known for these massive iron chariots. And because of the rainstorm, they sunk in the mud, and there was this big flood that swept the Canaanites away. And the Israelites then, they killed everyone, all the Canaanites who were fleeing. Maybe you've heard the story of Sisera. Sisera was the leader of the Canaanites, the general, and he went to a tent, and some woman gave him refuge and then drove a tent peg into his skull. If you've ever heard that story before, it's in the Bible. So it's Judges 4 and 5 if you want to go back and read. But anyway, the point is, the Israelites won, but Maraz, one of the cities that should have been fighting, didn't. They didn't fight on behalf of the Israelites against the Canaanites. They didn't fight, they stayed back. God cursed them and all of the inhabitants. And that's what Charles Spurgeon was referring to. He's like, we're called. We have this calling here. And if we don't do anything, for whatever reason, scared, you're lacking courage, you don't want to get involved, maybe curse upon you. Our founding fathers, our founding generation, they knew this story. They knew their Bible inside and out. They knew this curse. There was an anonymous writer back in 1774 who wrote that instead of defending their country, there were fellow countrymen who were advocates of tyranny and oppression, but there were also some who were just on the fence and didn't do anything. John Adams wrote about this. He said about a third of the colonists were for revolution, about a third were loyal to the king, and about a third were in the middle, whatever. I don't care. And the conclusion by this writer back in 1774 was that, this is a quote, God himself abhors the sluggish spirit, like Holy Spirit, like a capital S spirit. God abhors the sluggish spirit who tamely submits to the galling yoke and from humiliating, from the humiliating yoke and from a slavish love of life, who prefer that, right? That's the Maras, the people of Maras. Oh, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to, it's too dangerous. So God hates the person who prefers his own private interest to the more permanent good of posterity. So the argument back among many in our founding generation that Americans who are in support of the crown or Americans who don't care either way, you are guilty of the sin of Maras. And our founders knew the Bible. I don't want to be seen by God or anyone as apathetic to the things that matter in our fallen world. We are behind enemy lines as Christians. We're called to be a light. And politics is one way to show it. And we should use it for good. We have two guests coming up next, and then we'll wrap up with an example of us not taking the calling and what happens then. That's next right here on the First TV.
What we're seeing culturally today is that there's an intentional plan to mess up our children. So you have the perverted hearts of adults who seek to prey on children. And then you have the intentional indoctrination that's coming from the libraries and from the curriculums. Say to you today that no, we cannot abandon the public school system, but we must treat it as if it's a mission field. There are three takeaways that I have. Number one, perverts are perverting the hearts and the minds of our children. Number two, parents are unaware. And number three, pastors have failed to address this issue. But too many Christian leaders today bury their head in the sand with their rear ends tucked up in the air, simply afraid to tackle the hard things because they want to be liked.
Okay. Pastor John Amanchukwu is here with us right now. He's the executive producer of the movie 22 Words, exposing the loss of decency in American education, which I obviously want to get to. Pastor, great to talk to you, sir. Thank you for being here and for your work in this field. So let me just ask you the overarching question of today's show. Should the church be involved in politics?
Well, first and foremost, I believe that we should. I believe that the Bible is a biblical political document. The Bible speaks to cultural issues. It speaks to current day issues. And even when you go through the scriptures, you look at the Old Testament in particular, you see God using men and women to speak truth to power and to address the issues of our day. And so now more than ever, I think it's imperative that Christians realize that if we are silent, then the world will not hear what God has to say about these current relevant issues that we contend with. We saw what happened during the pandemic in 2020 when the secular left deemed the church as being non-essential. We saw the government overreach. We saw the government infringe upon the rights of the Christian church. And so what we don't want to do is take that same role and position and say that, hey, we don't have a voice in the issues of our day, because we really do. And we have the answer and the hope for mankind.
What happens if we don't? What happens if we stay silent for whatever reason?
If we don't, is we'll be deemed once again non-essential. We won't be able to win the lost and be able to bring righteous understanding to many of the diabolical issues of our day. Consider this simple issue that we're contending with today, where people are saying that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. The Bible speaks clearly to that. In Genesis 1:27, God said that he made us male and female. The Bible is the answer. It was once said that the Bible is more current than tomorrow's newspaper. And so truth cannot abound without absolute truth. And absolute truth doesn't stem from man, it comes from God. So if the church hides the truth in unrighteousness, as Paul mentioned in Romans chapter 1, then we will fail to be able to reach the lost and to reach the masses.
Yeah. Okay. Let me play devil's advocate here, because I'm trying to figure out if the other side on this argument has a little bit of a point, or if there's like some nuance we can find here, or if it's just a lie from the devil, right? And that is, we're supposed to be heavenly minded, Pastor, and when you get involved in this party politics, it's dirty, it's messy, it can offend some people, and we shouldn't be focused on that stuff. We should only be focused on Jesus and the gospel, and that's it, nothing else.
You don't want to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. And so when we consider those who tell us, hey, on the left, there's a such thing as separation of church and state, and it's in the Constitution. Well, that's a lie. It's not in the Constitution. That's something that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association, telling them about a wall of separation. And the intent was to protect the church from the state and not the state from the church. And so, yes, pastors should speak boldly and courageously to the issues of our day. The Bible tells us clearly about many of the topics that we're dealing with today, the life issue. The Bible speaks to that. When you consider the marriage issue and debate and topic, the Bible speaks to that. When you talk about the open border problem and crisis that we have today, the book of Nehemiah is solely written about building a wall. In the words of President Trump, a very big wall to protect those who live within those borders. And so, yes, the Bible is the answer to much of the mess that we're in. And we saw what happened in 1962 and in 1963 when the Bible was banned and when school-sponsored prayer was banned, which is why I put together my film, 22 Words, to really address that issue and that topic, and to show the American people that we've gone from prayer to porn in this country. We've gone from prayer to mental rapists having access to our children and putting this kind of content. This book is entitled Worm Loves Worm. This book talks about same-sex marriage to children. When I was the age of 3 and 4 and 5, and this book is available for kids early as the age of 4. When I was 4, I didn't want to think about mommy and daddy kissing and hugging and all of those things. That kind of stuff kind of grossed me out. And so why are you talking about marriage to 4-year-olds? It really makes no sense. And then you have this book, it's entitled, It Feels Good to Be Yourself. And I'll read a little bit of this right here in the jacket. It says, some people are boys, some people are girls. Then it goes on to say that some people are both, neither, or somewhere in between. That's a lie. There are only two sexes. This whole gender thing can be an identity. We're on this gender spectrum. And right now, I think there's over 72 different genders in the first place. That's a lot of confusion. And the Bible says that God is not the author of confusion. So where does confusion come from? It comes from Satan. And so it's satanic to teach kids about transgenderism. This book even talks about being non-binary, cisgender, and transgender. I mean, find a 10-year-old who can even spell those words, right? Let alone a 4-year-old. And so there was a non-denominational, non-proselytizing prayer that was allowed to be recited every day in the public school system in 1962. The prayer says, Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon thee, and we beg thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. The prayer only had 22 words in it. It was non-denominational, non-proselytizing, and non-offensive. Why wouldn't you want a child to pray for the safety of a teacher? Consider all the school shootings that we see today. Why wouldn't you want a child to pray for their parents? And so what we saw with the removal of school-sponsored prayer in 1962 after the Engel v. Vitale court case, according to former Secretary of Education William Bennett, you saw a sharp increase in violence, in teenage pregnancy. You saw a sharp increase in the number of students who were addicted to different drugs and mental stimulants. And so many of these things can be point back to the fact that we have removed God from the marketplace. And I'll say to you today that wherever God is barred, that place is cursed. And so now more than ever, I hope and I pray and I will work and endeavor to make sure that we can get school sponsored prayer back into the public school system, that we can get the 10 commandments back into the public school system, that we can provide school choice to children so that they're not disenfranchised and forced to be up under the government school system. You know, it was once said that in the 40s and the 50s, blacks were locked out of the public school system. But today in 2025, we're trapped in because many blacks don't have the economic resources to have true choice. You know, the left loves choice until you apply it to education. And so one of the things that we have to consider is that the educational crisis that we're in, the moral lapse of America, these things stem from something, and it comes from the rejection of Almighty God.
Amen. What was that prayer again? Can you give it to us one more time? And where did this prayer come from? Who, like, was this a government-sponsored prayer? Was this in like a couple districts, or what was this prayer?
It was a government-sponsored prayer that was recited. It was initially recited in Hyde Park, New York. It went to court through the Ingle v. Vitale court case. And, you know, you have people like Madeline Murray O'Hare who didn't want her son, William, to recite that prayer, even though they gave him opportunity and space to be removed from the classroom. And so it was a school-sponsored prayer that many people, many kids were allowed to recite daily. But they rejected that because it talked about Judeo-Christian principles. Although it didn't reference the name of Jesus, Allah, or Buddha, but we know that this country was founded upon Judeo-Christian principles. Now, that doesn't make me a Christian nationalist, even though I don't fear being called that, you know. I wear that as a badge of honor. However, it just means that I'm factual. And you can't be a revisionist. You know, we have so many woke revisionists today who seek to mentally sodomize adults and in particular children to the point where they're confused about their existence. They hate this country. They hate the American flag. You know, there's so much hate being propagated from the left. That's why I appreciate the work that President Donald J. Trump is doing, even with all of his executive orders to realign America, even with the new faith office and the anti-Christian bigotry work that Pam Bondi will be working on. That's something that is paramount for our country. I'll say this to you as well. I've traveled now to 18 states defending children, 18 states. I've been as far as California. I've been to Texas. I've been to Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been to North Carolina where I live, to 6 different, even in my state. I've been to a total of 18 states fighting against gender theory, queer theory, and critical race theory. And I have 3 takeaways as a result of my national campaign. Number 1, perverts are perverting the hearts and the minds of our children. Number 2, parents are unaware. And number 3, pastors have failed to do their job. And so as a pastor, as a husband, as a father, as a patriarch, as a person who understands the significance of the nuclear family, I'm traveling this country leading a national campaign telling men that now more than ever, we cannot be neutered by feminists. You know, many men today are afraid to be masculine because masculinity has been demonized by feminists. So if a man is too assertive and aggressive, they call that toxic masculinity. If a man is soft, weak, timid, and reserved, they call that beta. So men are on this pendulum of what to do and how to respond. How do I stand? How do I walk? How do I talk? Right? And so I'm telling men around this country to just be a man because there's nothing toxic about masculinity. But I've been handcuffed.
No.
You know, I've been handcuffed as a result of my stand nationally. I took a stand in my hometown, North Carolina, Wake County to be exact, against, you know, the system there, the Wake County public school system, pushing gender theory and queer theory upon kids, which is against state law. We passed a law in 2024 where we made it clear where the school system could not talk about gender and transgenderism and cisgender, those topics, to children as early as the age of 4. And the school board still continued to discuss those things. And there was a young girl who was forced to read from a short story there in Wake County. And she was traumatized by it to the point that she left the school system. The school board refrained to do anything about it. I came and took a bold stand and told them that they were criminals and that they deserved to all be fired and replaced. And I ended up in handcuffs. So this is a major battle that's taking place around this country. I appreciate the tone from the top from President Donald J. Trump, but that's not gonna be enough. We need a grassroots efforts.
We all listen. If you can get arrested, if you can get handcuffed for standing up for that simple thing, we should be inspired by that and do our simple part as well. Pastor John Amanchukwu, it's great to talk to you, sir. Executive producer of the movie 22 Words, exposing the loss of decency in American education. Pastor, I hope we can talk again.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Keep this going next right here on the First TV.
The Sunday morning sermon is actually a really bad way to deal with something like politics. I guarantee you, if you go up on Sunday morning in most congregations and you try to preach the one sermon on politics that you haven't been preaching on for a long time, your Monday morning inbox is going to be an ugly scene. And that's honestly why most pastors, or many pastors, don't preach on politics on Sunday morning, because they instinctively know my Monday morning inbox is going to look awful if I do that.
I want to go to Dr. John G. West. He's the vice president of the Discovery Institute, author of Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, Why America's Christian Leaders Are Failing and What We Can Do About It. Dr. West, thanks for being here. I don't even know who that was, but does that guy have a good point? What are the reasons why pastors do not engage in politics like maybe they should?
Yeah, well, actually, I think he does have a legitimate point. I think the pastors should be preaching the gospel first and foremost. The issue is that the gospel does have social consequences. And so while I think it can be a problem for pastors to be focusing, especially on partisan politics, if partisan politics is coming for you, either in the area of religious liberty or trying to promote a culture of death or trying to actually force the culture into ways that are sort of anti-biblical, then I think pastors and other Christians really don't have a choice. They have an obligation to speak up.
Shouldn't play devil's advocate? The pastor's job is to preach the gospel. That's it. Don't touch on these other issues. It's too political, too controversial. You're going to offend somebody, and it's not worth going there. Just focus on your heavenly-minded worldview, and that's it. What do you say to that?
Well, again, I have great sympathy for that, and I do think that the number one thing is for pastors to preach the gospel. But of course, Christians aren't just pastors. There are Christians in every walk of life. And so overall, we are called to be salt and light. And so there are some things, great questions of national morality, things where the Bible is clear about how we ought to act and how society ought to act. And if politics is, for example, during the COVID era, you had governments shutting down churches for months on end when they were not shutting down other things. So in Nevada, a devout church-going governor shut down churches with onerous restrictions. At the same time, he largely opened up casinos. Now, unfortunately, most churches went along with that, and they didn't speak out. The few churches that did speak out and try to counteract that government restrictions on churches actually worshiping were few and far between. And so then you get more of that. And so I think especially in the area of religious liberty, that's one case where churches and pastors do need to speak up, or else they're not going to have the right to meet.
Yeah. So our time is limited here, and I'm assuming if you've made it this far into the special, you probably agree with us. So I'll skip over the question of how America's Christian leaders are failing into why you think they are. What is the motivation behind their lack of courage, I'll call it?
Yeah, I think there are different things, but I think three big things stand up. Number one, a lot of Christians get their information not from your show, but from the same sources that the secular elites do, whether it be the New York Times, Washington Post, or Google searches or Wikipedia. All these places are heavily biased against Orthodox Christianity, against a lot of good things. But I know a lot of my Christian friends, when I was a Christian college professor, a lot of my colleagues, they got the information from the same bad sources. Garbage in, garbage out. That's going to influence you. Number two, a lot of Christians seek to please the wrong people, and so they look up to. It's not just that they listen to, but they want to please the secular culture. And so then finally, I think in a lot of our Christian institutions, churches, Christian schools, Christian universities, that the people in charge, the board members, the people called by God to actually keep their institutions faithful to their mission, often are just capitulating, and they themselves may be personally biblically faithful, but they're not willing to hold that standard to their pastors or to their Christian schools, for example.
Okay. Let's say someone does that latter point and it offends, there's a member of the church who's a Democrat and they love this Democrat and they're pro-choice. Or whatever. The thing is, our pastor's going to get up there, have a conviction, and we're going to offend this person, and that's going to affect their walk, their perhaps becoming a Christian one day or something like that. Why get involved in that case if it's going to affect this person following Jesus?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And again, I think that pastors are not experts on everything. And I actually don't think that pastors should be involved in every detail of public policy where there can be legitimate disagreements among Christians. But abortion is a great example. I mean, the Bible talks about God creates us in the womb, knows from the very beginning who we are. It talks about in Psalm 139. Christians from the earliest years of the church stood against abortion and infanticide in the Roman Empire. So this is not controversial Christian teaching. So if you are in a society where that is being pushed and advocated, that's a moral issue. And the fact that there may be people in your congregation who don't realize that this is an issue of discipleship, that you are misleading them. They're not going to have a great walk with Jesus if they turn around and have an abortion or promote abortion with their kids or help facilitate other people having abortion, let alone infanticide. So you're not helping them walk with Christ. You're actually being an obstacle by not telling them the truth.
I want to talk about marriage for a minute because I see the transgenderism thing that happened and you kind of walk back, right? You walk back from transgenderism, like what is a man or a woman? And then you go back one, it's homosexuality. And then you go before that. And I remember in the beginning of the whole gay marriage argument, there was a lot of, well, you Christians get divorced too all the time. Like, what's the difference? Like, you're right. So what is their marriage that you hold so sacred? You guys aren't exactly living up to anything special either. How far back do you go before you start to see the failings of church in culture that you think kind of started this downward spiral?
Yeah, Mike, thank you for so much raising that. In my chapter on sexuality, I do that because a lot of people who are so concerned about transgenderism, which I think they should be, you have to realize where did it start. And I do think, the church in America, unfortunately, sadly, largely gave up on biblically faithful marriage for heterosexuals. And with the divorce culture, there are some biblical grounds for divorce, but divorce is a tragedy, and certainly we should work against it. And a lot of churches really just didn't do much. And I give the experience in the church that I was involved in that was usually biblically faithful, but when it came to us addressing divorce, people were really skittish because, of course, a lot of people are divorced. And I want to say, everyone can be forgiven, so it's not about that. But if you don't uphold the standards or help people understand why faithful marriage is important and marriage is permanent, you're going to get the opposite. And so, the church, that was really the first step. Once you're giving up on that sex is made for biblically faithful marriage, then you get what we have today.
We're in about a minute or so. It's a big question, but what would an awakening look like in America? Like if we had another great awakening, like John Edwards style awakening, what would that look like? Or why do we even need something like that?
Well, I think we just need to look around at our society and realize why we need it. All things are breaking down, including our family structures, including crime, all sorts of things. Now, what would it look like? I think it would look like there would be a return. More people would go to churches, but also what's happening in the churches would be genuine discipleship on these things that would be countercultural, because we have a lot of things in our society that are culture are really bad. It would be where Christians and their kids wouldn't be getting the same information. They wouldn't be letting their kids be raised by social media or by TikTok, and they'd be raised actually again by their parents and by their fellow peers in the church. And so we've had those things in the past. I write about some of them in my book, The Second Great Awakening, which was really, if people don't know about it, they should read my book, because it was a huge transformation in America from a time when many people were falling away from the faith. And so good things can happen.
I saw a bumper sticker the other day. It said, "I homeschool because I've seen the village and I don't want it raising my child." Thought you'd appreciate that. Dr. John G. West, the book is Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, Why America's Christian Leaders Are Failing and What We Can Do About It. And please go check out the Discovery Institute, which Dr. West is the vice president of. Dr. West, I hope we can talk again soon, sir. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
I want to wrap up finally with, I think, some examples of what the good doctor there was speaking of with some of our failures today, even now, and how inside the church is where we need to wake up and be the strongest and have the most conviction. We'll do that next, right here on the First TV. Welcome back to our special, Do Politics Belong in the Church? And we'll flip it around too. Does the church belong in politics? Right now, we are in the beginning stages of what I believe is a type of conservative revolution. And it's a wonderful thing. And I agree with it politically in nearly every way. There's a great realignment happening globally and here in America. And I'm all here for it. But what's becoming more and more clear is that it's not even close to enough. Not even close. I love Doge. If you listen to my show on SiriusXM Patriot, it's like the Doge show, okay? We're talking about Doge all the time. I'm all about it. It's amazing. But we cannot save this nation just by having a federal government that's more efficient. Like, think of like the craziest, like even if you got rid of the IRS, which is like the greatest thing ever, that's not it. That's not it. I want to do it. But that's not going to save us. The only way we can save our country is by being a more virtuous people. That's it. The only way we can save this country is if we save souls along the way. We need a real revival. We need a revival. We need an awakening. Doge is amazing. It's not the answer. But to get our country back and to have that revival, it requires us to be bold. The church for a long time has been very nice, right? It's the Jesus holding a lamb and the baby Jesus and like this little nice Christianity thing. And in doing it, they've compromised so much truth. And you become just worthless, absolutely worthless. Rick Warren is an example of this. Pastor of Saddleback Church in Orange County, California. For a very long time, he was like the very palatable evangelical in the media, right? The media loved him because he didn't tell them the truth. Now, he wrote this tweet. He deleted it a couple days after, but it exemplifies the worldview that he's had for a long time and that's been way too prominent in the church at large. And if you read John 17, it's all about Christians not being of this world. And you're going to face persecution by people in the world, right? And there's nothing more of the world than the media, like the American lefty media. And when the media lifts up Rick Warren as one of their own, I saw there was Oprah put out her list of top 10 greatest spiritual leaders of today. And there was a Christian pastor on that list. And you're like, oh man, that's a list you don't want to be on. If your pastor's on the list of Oprah's top 10 spiritual leaders with like a couple Buddhists, and right, like, don't be on that list. Like, leave that church. So Rick Warren, anyway, he wrote this on Twitter. He said they crucified Jesus with two others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. The guys on both sides were thieves. And if you're looking for the real Jesus, not a caricature disfigured by partisan motivations, you'll find Jesus in the middle, not on either side. Signed, your Uncle Screwtape. No, wait, signed Rick Warren. What? So because Jesus was in the middle of the three crosses, we therefore need to reject the Democrat and Republican policy positions on issues? Like, do you see how absurd that is? Like, that's such a spineless squish. Don't take a stand. Don't ever admit that any party might be politically right on a moral issue, because, heaven forbid, you may be seen as partisan, and then that's bad, so better don't stand for anything ever. So, okay, how are you going to be in the middle? How are you going to be in the middle on abortion? How are you going to be in the middle of homosexuality? How are you going to be in the middle of transgender and kids? There's no middle of those issues. Jesus was never in the middle when it came to telling the truth. He told it boldly, got him killed. The idea, like, I just bring up this Rick Warren tweet because this is like the archetype. Like, Rick Warren's like the archetype of spiritual guidance that so many Christians in America have gotten for decades. And it's like, oh, like that, like, it makes perfect sense why we are where we are. We got to stop with this middle ground nonsense. We need to be people of conviction. Being in the middle means you're just going to go with the flow. That's what that is. You're going to go in the flow. You're going to go with whatever culture says. You're going to go with whatever's safe. You're going to go with whatever doesn't get you in any trouble. That is so worthless. We don't need that at all. You are in the way, or if not worse. To go back to the sin of Marahas earlier, the curse of Marahas. We need to instead focus on the truth and proclaim it boldly. You have to have a conviction. Like, you're not allowed to have convictions today, right? But you must. Now is the time. You must have a conviction that life begins at conception. Now, we can have humility on how to best achieve that end nationwide, right? It's the how where the humility enters the picture. But knowing what is true, there's no room. No middle. Knowing what is good, knowing what is righteous. And we are called to be all in on these issues. Otherwise, what good are you? James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. And it will be given to him. Wisdom will be given to you. We need to pray for it. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts, and this is who Christians have become, because of Christian leaders have allowed us, so many people, to be like this. The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. Don't be that guy. Don't be driven and tossed by the wind of our culture. Don't be like this person. About Taylor Swift is this person. Guys, I want to throw up the Taylor Swift. Pro-LGBT. Pro-choice. That's the real Christianity. Okay, that's culture. There's your culture. Okay, there's your getting tossed back and forth. There's your getting tossed around. There's your going with the flow. There's your not offensive take. You want to be not offensive? There it is right there. It's also wrong. It's not offensive. I'd rather be right even if it's offensive. I got 1 minute left. Before I was a Christian, I didn't believe any of this stuff. I started to ask questions about creation and evolution. I realized that evolution is the most ridiculous thing ever created. It's like so stupid. It's like the stupidest idea ever conceived of ever, that we just came from something from nothing. It's like ridiculous. So then I started to learn about creation. And then I thought, okay, like there's God, creator. Okay, what else does this God say about things? Like, what else? And then you read your Bible and you realize it's all in there. It's all in there. And you realize that God punished people for not obeying everything he said to a T. Like, hey, Moses, you hit the rock twice. Hey, man, you touched the ark because you didn't carry it the way that I told you to carry it. Hey, Israelites, you didn't kill all the men, women, and children like I told you to. And terrible things happened to the people who did not obey. God is a God of conviction. And we need to be too. The Bible's not sort of true. Jesus wasn't just a man who walked around and said some smart things. We're not born good and maybe make a few mistakes. No, those are all wrong. That's what people on the left believe. And if you're in the middle, you're no good on any of those things either. We got to be grounded in truth from the start. And if that means getting involved in politics now and again, well, yeah, of course. But it's standing for the truth. And that's what matters more than anything. Mike Slater, First TV, spread the word.